Greetings hobbyists, this is All, and in this video we're going to have a look at Blender 3.5 and the excitement that is VDM sculpting. So if you haven't downloaded Blender 3.5 or later, then obviously you need to go and do that, but it's got some information if you go to the blender.org website, and while you've got the download button you can also click what's new, which will go through what's new in Blender. And well, there's a lot new in Blender, and a lot of it's to do with hair, which we're going to sort of skip past. So this video is going to really deal with this from a beginner point of view. I'm going to assume no knowledge and talk through what we can do with VDM. VDM stands for Vector Displacement Maps, and this is really exciting. Like, I don't sculpt a lot, it's something I really need to improve on, but honestly, this is amazing. So we're going to talk through what VDM is, how we can make vector displacement maps, and how we can use them in Blender. I'll cover those one at a time, so if you want to skip through things, you can always get to the section that you want. And as I said, I'm going to cover this as if you have no idea what any of this stuff is, and I'll give some hints and tips along the way. So this video from Blender's website gives you a pretty good idea of what VDM is. Basically like alpha textures, which is a texture that you can use as a brush to be able to sculpt onto a surface. But where VDM has massive advantages over alpha brushes is that alpha brushes can only work in one dimension, typically along the normals of a vector. Basically, it just pulls things out, which means you can't do things like undercuts. On this model, you can see things like the ear, the nose, all have undercuts, which wouldn't be possible at all if you were just using alpha textures. So this is something that's been available in ZBrush for a while, and having Blender have it now is a massive step forward. It gives a lot more potential for the platform for sculpting, and as soon as this starts building up a good library like there is for alpha textures, this is just going to be fantastic for people that want to sculpt and might be looking for a certain item just to add to a model. Now if we just scroll down slightly, it does say, for the best results, VDM textures should be used in an OpenEXR format, and there's a link to the manual, and importantly there's a download demo file. You're going to want to download this even if you're not a beginner, because it basically got everything set up for you ready to go. Once you've downloaded that zip file and extracted it, you're going to have two options here, or two files. You've got one that's using the brushes, and it's got a little demo that you can go into, and it's got some nice text of how to do things. It's got some textures here, which means you've already got these ready to go, and that's what's being used in the sculpting demo. I'm going to sort of skip that one out because it's pretty self-explanatory. And then importantly, you've got this creating brushes, where you've got a demo of how to do it, the geometry nodes, and the bit that probably makes a difference if you want to make your own ones, you get this add-on VDM brush baker, which I've extracted, and we're going to go and open this. So this provides you with this file. I'm going to move this section down because we don't need it for the beginning, and I'm going to get rid of this because I don't want it, so I'm going to right click and just click join areas and then click across. I will turn on my screencast keys. Obviously, you might not have that, and you definitely don't need them. And this is your plane. This is what we're going to use to create our vector displacement map. And there's a few stages to this. The first is that we're going to need to subdivide this, and there's a couple of ways we could do this. I'm just going to tab into edge mode. I've got machine tools, which has this nice pie menu. Obviously, you might not, but you can just tab and go into your edge mode. I'm going to press Control and E, and I'm going to subdivide this, and I'm going to up that to 10 times, and then I'm going to press Shift and R to do it again. Now at this point, and this is the very important bit, the way this works is that Blender is going to have a look at this plane and use that as the basis of this brush, and it needs this plane to be flat, so just bear that in mind. What you also need to do is come into your modifier, and you need to add a modifier, and you need to add a multi-resolution modifier. Now this basically subdivides it, but it makes it a layer that you can turn on and off, and Blender needs this because it's going to use this flat plane and then relate it to the things that are on top of it from the multi-resolution modifier. You don't really need to understand that, but that's basically what it's doing. So what I'm going to do is click simple a couple of times, and I would recommend that you click simple, not the subdivide, because it keeps these corners pointed, which is sort of what you want. It's very unlikely that you can actually use this all the way to the corners, but there's no reason not to do that. And I'm going to do, I don't know, let's say 4. But you're going to have to base this on what your computer can handle. Now, if I press T, it brings up our side panel, and when I go into tab and then sculpt mode, it means that I can see my brushes and I can drag these out. Now, my first recommendation, you want these edges to remain flat. It's really important you have that. Later on I'll show you what will happen if you don't do that, but just for now take my word for it, and the way I'd recommend you do that is scroll down, go to your mask brush. I'm going to press F to make my brush a little bit smaller, and I'm just going to mask off my edges there. And you'll see this gives a nice blurry sort of edge to it, which is sort of important because it means that you're not going to have a really harsh edge. If you want to, you can always press Control as you're doing this, and it does the opposite. So you can sort of blur that out, but do make sure that you've got your edge completely masked. So something like that, which should do fine. But you just want this blurred border so that your mask is going to sort of drop off nicely towards the edge. You don't need to do that if you can be really controlled with where your brushes are doing, but I really would recommend it just to make sure you're not going to have any problems. And I actually have a file saved that looks like this just because it makes it easier to, well, come straight into it. You don't have to do it at the beginning each time. So let's make something with a undercut, so we can demonstrate how this is going to work and why it's going to be so fantastic. So I've got a fairly decent tablet for this. It's a Wacom Cintiq, but you really don't need that. I started with a really cheap tablet, and I've got a link to that in the description by a company called Veek. It was really good. Honestly, absolutely fantastic. It was just that I decided to upgrade, but you really don't need to. Okay, that's not perfect, but it will do for demonstration purposes. Now, one thing I have done is I've made sure that this doesn't go outside of this plane. That's quite important as well from what I understand, but you'll notice it is going slightly over the mask, and that's fine because it's still part of the plane. So at this point we need to come to the bottom and drag this back up here, and we've got this geometry node set up, but the only bit of this that's important is this bit that says image texture. That's the only bit that matters, and I'm going to expand this out and zoom into this using my mouse wheel. This is where we're going to get our vector displacement map. So we don't want to apply anything like the multi-resolution modifier, we just need to set this up so it works. So let's go through how to do that. First thing to do, come to your render properties and scroll down, and samples you want to take down to a lower number so it doesn't take very long. I'm going to put it down to 1, and then once you've done that, scroll down further and you've got this bake option, and you'll notice these settings have been set up for you already. You don't want to click this bake from multi-res option even though it's using the multi-res. Bake type needs to be emit, and then you want to target to be an image texture, clear images, and then when we've got size, we're just going to change that to 32. Then we're going to come over to our geometry nodes. Make sure we've got this image texture selected, and we should already have this as the VDM baking material up here. If not, then just make sure that's selected. Then we're going to click on new, and we've got some settings that we need to fiddle around with. The first is that this width doesn't need to be as large as this, so we're just going to change this to 512. I think this is actually recommended to be changed down to 512, so I would do that. We're going to change this name to Horn VDM Test. And then importantly, we need to click this 32-bit float. It's very important you do this, otherwise you're going to end up with something that just isn't right. And because you've got to have clicked into the new image options, this is the bit where if you've got something and it's not working, it's probably this. Click OK, and then we've got all of this information here. We should have linear, flat, repeated, generated, and we need to change our color space to non-color. Once we've done that, we can come back over here and click Bake. One thing I will point out, we're in sculpt mode here and it's the only thing that's on this. If I come into object mode, you'll notice that because we're in sculpting mode, this is selected. It's very important you've selected this. If you've got multiple things in your scene, make sure that you've got this selected. Once you're happy with that and that's all set up correctly, click Bake. You'll get this progress bar at the bottom which goes from 0 and then to 100, and you've got your baked image here, which is going to be a combination of blues and purples and reds. Mine's mostly blue for this one. Then we come up to here where it says image, and we want to click Save As, and again we need to make sure we've got some settings set up correctly. So get to the file where you want, and we're going to need to file format and change this to OpenEXR, and we need to change this to RGB, float half, codec. It does say to put this as zip, but I've been leaving it as none and it's worked fine, and then non-color, and then click Save Image, and this should work fine. I'll come into a new blend file. Let's just get this sorted so we can have a look at this and see how we actually set up the brush for use. So I'm going to S to scale that a little bit larger. I'm going to press Ctrl and 3 to subdivide this. In fact, let's up this a little bit to, let's say, 6, and then I'm going to apply this. That might need a little bit more to it. We can always add another subdivision later. And then I'm going to tab and come into sculpt mode. If you don't have machine tools, you can just do that up here. And we've got our brushes at the side. We're just going to stick with our draw brush, and that allows us to effectively draw on this. In fact, that definitely is going to need subdividing again. So let's add a modifier and then subdivide that one more time. Let's do something like that. That looks much better. In fact, that might be a little bit much, but let's leave it for now. It should be okay. And then we're going to come down here to our texture properties, and that's going to allow us to change our brush. We're going to click plus for new, and then I want to open up my texture. So find your file, open image, and then we should have this set up, and that should be just as you want it. Single image and linear. We don't change this to non-color here, we just leave it as it is. We are going to have to fiddle with some of our brush settings up here. Texture, it's not going to work as tiled. We need to change it to aeroplane, and then click this vector displacement, and then stroke. I generally want this as anchored. You can do it with one of the other ones, but I find this works best. And then fall off, I'm going to change that to be constant. Now, as I draw on this is going to look a little bit rough. Mostly because it looks very, very stubby. And that's because my strength is set down to 5. So let's up that. And we've got our horn being able to be drawn, and you just drag out to make it larger and rotate around. You can see this is quite pixelated. If I come back to my settings and add another subdivision, that's looking much better. Obviously it is going to slow down my computer some, but it should be fine. There we go. Finally, before we finish, I just want to come back to this and just demonstrate why it's so important, or why it's a good idea to mask off your areas here. So I'm just going to come back into sculpt mode, and what we're going to do is unmask this area around the edge. So I'm just press Alt and M to do that, and then I'm just going to grab something, let's say the grab brush, and I'm just going to affect a little bit on the side. Now obviously we wouldn't do this intentionally. I mean, you might do, there might be something you want to do, but if you've got a brush and you accidentally just come across here and just nick that sort of back edge, you might not notice it, or more importantly, it's actually really a pain to get this back exactly where it was before without undoing it. Obviously that's a little extreme, but you sort of get the idea of what could potentially happen if you get these little bits around the edges. I'm just going to come back and do exactly the same thing, and we're just going to bake this again. Now straight away you can see this, we've got these coloured bits on the edge where you can see there's a difference, and we'll just save this so we can see what happens. So if we come back into our cube, I've already set up the brush, and you'll see what happens here. As I drag this out, we have this error on the edge, which we've got here. So that's what we've got to be careful of, and why it's a good idea to mask off the edge. You can try to do things about this. For example, if you change the fall off to be smooth, what that will do is that will minimize this, and you sort of don't get it as much. But if you've got detail that comes all the way up to the edge, you're also losing that as well. So there are ways around this. Changing the fall off to smooth is one of them, but it can cause problems of its own, so I just generally use the mask function. So that's how to create, bake, set up, and use a vector displacement map in Blender 3.5 and beyond. Hopefully you're finding that as exciting as I am. If you do, and if you found this useful, please do give this video a like. And if you want to support the channel further, I do have a Patreon, and these fantastic people are already supporting me there. Thank you so much, guys. Honestly, I couldn't do this without you, and all of your encouragement is absolutely amazing. Thanks so much, guys, and I hope to see you next time. Have a great day.